Welcome to the Wellbeing Evolution and why philosophy is essential to therapy. As I said, these are going to be more informal in style. Uh, so, should I apologise for that? Well, not really, because you've been warned. So, there you go. Um, we're looking at what's the relevance of philosophy in regards to therapy. We may ask, why do I need to know that in order to become reasonably healthy, reasonably functional? But of course, that's a philosophical question in itself, because, or rather, it's sitting upon philosophical assumptions. Is to be healthy the optimal aim of therapy? Is to be happy the optimal aim of therapy? Many people argue or debate that in itself. So, person-centered theory emerges out of Carl Rogers' personality theory. And that's really, if you're going to look at personality theories, then fundamentally, it's linked to value judgments, because one of the primary questions is how to live. In what way are we taking therapy to a point where someone is augmenting their well-being through the therapeutic process? And so there needs to be some sort of theory behind that, or at least, let's say, kind of core principles or assumptions about that. And the natural sciences do not have axioms in regard to how to live. You could argue to some degree that sort of physiology or biology could inform us in terms of physical health. But again, that would be on the assumption that physical health and living healthily is our main aim. And in terms of personality theory and philosophy, I would say that would be a very limited way of defining what we're searching for or what we're aiming at via the therapeutic process. So we turn to philosophy because actually that's its speciality, looking at how to live, looking at the whys, the purpose, the meaning, the deeper experience, etc. So Carl Rogers himself said that we need to question ourselves as therapists. What are our motivations? Where are we going? How are we aligned philosophically? Now, we could say, all right, the client doesn't need to particularly have a formed philosophy, certainly not when they enter into the therapeutic process. But the counsellor and the therapist does. Now, why? Well, person-centered theory is based upon the idea that the individual, the client, has their own agency, their own intrinsic wisdom, their own resources to draw upon in order to find their way to whatever we could call well-being, some augmentation of their well-being, and perhaps a more optimized way of life. I hesitate to say happiness. The reason I hesitate to say happiness is because happiness is such a subjective perspective. One person's happiness could be someone else's mediocre, etc. It's very difficult to define. Anyway, we can point to some conditions that may be in place, but actually, what happiness is a very nebulous beast. If that's not too much of an odd juxtaposition. Anyway, so as a therapist, you need to be questioning how comfortable you are with allowing someone to draw on their own resources. Are you aligned with a person-centered kind of theory and application in terms of allowing somebody to draw on their own resources, make decisions about their own life? Some people may think that therapy is about us giving advice. Now, there may be some aspects of advice involved, when it comes to certain pragmatic measures, such as, optimizing sleep, or, aspects of nutrition, exercise, etc. But in terms of the direction of one's own life, a person-centered therapist should not be giving advice as such, should be telling someone what to do or where to go, and what direction to take. So, we're looking at whether someone can believe in the person-centered philosophy to the point that they are operating in alignment with it, or are they playing kind of lip service to the language of therapy, the language of, that's expected in that kind of interaction. Because it's, it could be possible to ostensibly seem like we're practicing therapy whilst actually sitting there thinking, but I know better. Now, of course, there is, that we have to say that the therapist has aspects of what they know better about. They are a trained professional. So in terms of applying and implementing therapy, yes, they do know better. But from the point of view of person-centered therapy, it's the client that knows better, actually. If we're looking at knowing better from that perspective via one's own experience. So Kierkegaard, for instance, a very kind of, one of the figureheads of phenomenology, and Carl Rogers referred to Kierkegaard many times in his writings, and listed him as one of his main philosophical kind of inspirations. One of his famous quotes was, "Anxiety is the dizziness of freedom." And if we trace back, in the Western tradition at least, the concept of angst being kind of articulated and recognized, again, we can credit that to Kierkegaard in terms of at least popularizing it. Who knows, maybe some obscure guy in, I don't know, some park somewhere else, contemporary to Kierkegaard came up with it as well, but we're not aware of him. So, we'll stick with Kierkegaard for now. So philosophy, again, is a big part of person-centered theory. Carl Rogers also referred to Lao Tzu quite a lot in terms of the Tao Te Ching, the Chinese philosopher. We're talking millennia back, kind of 2,500, 3,000 years back. And he refers to him in terms of Wei Wu Wei, which is doing, not doing, if you're going to translate it as that. The kind of philosophy of non-direction, the philosophy that you allow the world to be what it is. And again, that then applies to the client in terms of allowing them to be who they are. So there's an element of exploration, and there's an element of the therapist, of course, from time to time may point out or refer back or return, ask the client to return back to certain things they may have said, which you could argue is directing the client, which in a sense it is. However, you're directing the client back to their own content, to what they're talking about. You're not kind of introducing some vague kind of subject, or telling the client what to do, advising the client. Some people have this concept that you advise clients in therapy, but actually you don't, or you shouldn't. That's kind of another principle. Because if you're advising, then you're really putting your own frame of reference upon the client. And that's, if we're looking for something as a guideline in terms of person-centered theory, then the one thing you don't do is overlay your own frame of reference upon the client. So, in a kind of nutshell, that's what philosophy has to do with therapy. We will be looking more at individual aspects of philosophy and philosophers and how they relate to well-being and therapy. But for now, that's the first actual video recorded. So thanks for watching.